Hello, this is Coach Wilson, and this is Unit 4, Section 2. Okay, so we are picking up with Section 2 today of our notes, and we're going to move into the rest of the amendments. Starting with the 11th Amendment, it placed limits on the suits against the state. When we say suits, we're not talking about suits you wear, we're talking about court cases, okay? And essentially, it clearly defined the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court concerning a case brought against a state by a citizen of another state. However, this amendment amendment to the Constitution trying to protect the states from being sued by other states who were over a federal law essentially has kind of fallen by the wayside. States are brought to court all the time. However, it was designed to protect the states from who they could be sued by. So the 12th Amendment was also brought to the Constitution later on, okay, and it basically redefined how we elected the president and vice president. Originally, whenever we elected president, you voted for the president. Then the runner-up was the vice president. Now you voted for president and vice president together, okay? They're cooperative, rather than it being the first and second highest vote getters. And you can imagine how that could cause problems. Imagine if Biden had won the election and then Trump was his vice president. That would have been disastrous. Okay, the same as when Obama ran and Mitt Romney would have been his vice president. Okay, that would have never worked. It didn't work then either. The 13th through 15th Amendment, we know those as the Civil Rights Amendments or Civil War Amendments. And essentially they banned, the first one, the 13th Amendment, banned slavery and forced labor. And if you look at what Lincoln did in office, the 13th and 5th through the 15th Amendments were by far his most important accomplishments. Okay, the 14th Amendment defines citizenship and guarantees due process and equal protection of the law for all. Specifically, it gave full citizenship for African Americans. Okay, so now essentially, if you are born in the United States, you are a citizen. Okay. And then the 15th Amendment allows voting to all men regardless of race. If you notice there, however, it says all men, not women. Okay, so those are our Civil War amendments. I know I'm going through those quickly, but they're pretty simple and easy to remember. The 16th Amendment gives the authority to levy an income tax by the federal government. When we got to the Great Depression, and we're kind of getting, or not quite the Great Depression, this is going to be an important part of federal government's income, but in the 1870s through to the Great Depression, this income tax is going to give the government a little bit more teeth. Specifically, what you need to know is that it gave the federal government power to collect the tax. All right, and let's see here. Yeah, the 16th Amendment was passed in 1913, so right before World War I started, we passed the amendment. It's actually passed in 1909, but ratified in 1913. So we're getting kind of into the 1900s now, starting to get closer to modern day. The 17th Amendment establishes the direct election of senators. Okay, basically this shifted the choosing of senators from the state legislatures to people of the states. Right, so now we vote on who the senators are, not those being appointed by state legislatures. All right, so those representatives that have been elected to the state legislature, they're not selecting our senators to go to Washington. The 18th Amendment was passed towards the end of World War I as a way to try to increase Americans, I'm trying to think the right word, trying to increase Americans' due diligence, if you want to call it that, of how they used wheat and other resources that are used in alcohol that could be used instead for bread and various things of that nature. And the 18th Amendment is the prohibition of alcohol. It means you could not sell alcohol. Now, with that said, technically it could be consumed, but even then, generally that was going to be seen as a crime, or at least participating in a crime. It is the only amendment to ever be repealed, and you're going to see that years down the road, especially in the 1920s when they realized that it was causing more crime than it probably prevented. The 19th Amendment is women's right to vote, or what we call women's suffrage, And that was passed in 1920. Woodrow Wilson, who had seen the involvement of women during World War I, felt that it was not only his duty and the country's duty as citizens to give women the right to vote, but also they deserved that right long before this time and what they had done for the country. All right. The 20th Amendment is changes the beginning of the presidential date. You heard about that with the 2020 election. Essentially, that the president is changed on January 20th specifically, and congressional terms change on January 3rd. All right, so that's so that we have specific dates of when a president is to be sworn in, as well as clarifies how the deaths of presidents is to occur before swearing in would need to be handled. So if a president died, how do we handle this situation, all right? And the 20th Amendment, okay, let's see, I want to check that for you too. Yes, the 20th Amendment was passed in 1932, and oddly enough, ended up coming into effect in a few short years after FDR passed away, and Harry S. Truman took over in the middle of World War II, or well, towards the end of World War II, really. Okay, the 21st Amendment repealed prohibition. Not a whole lot there to kind of discuss. The 22nd Amendment limited presidential terms, and following Roosevelt, who served 3 terms and would have served a full 4th term, he served from 1933 until 1945, to give you an example. So essentially, he was elected in 1932, elected in 1936, elected in 1940, was elected for his 4th term and died. And so essentially, our country decided that they needed to stick with what had kind of been the norm of 2-term presidents or less. Okay, that means serving 4 or 8 years max as president of the United States to limit the power of the president. All right, 23rd Amendment grants the District of Columbia the right to 3 electors in presidential elections, okay, giving them basically power in the Electoral College and power in the election. Okay, so the people of DC are kind of their own district. That way, no one state could ever claim Washington, D.C. as its part of its state to make it more popular or better than the other states. D.C. being a separate entity, this gave them some involvement in the country. All right. The 24th Amendment abolishes the use of poll taxes in voting. Had been used to prevent African Americans from voting. Originally, poll taxes were essentially you had to pay a certain fee in order to actually go vote, which is very bad. But essentially, the 24th Amendment ensured that no tax could be charged to vote for any federal office. Okay, so they cannot charge you to come vote. The 25th Amendment defines the succession of the office of president. Okay, the vice president takes over and appoints a new VP. All right, now there is a line of succession. Essentially, depending on who is killed, like for example, if everyone dies in the State of the Union, there is a designated survivor who is appointed to essentially take over in case of that situation, in which he would then appoint a new vice president, and all those positions would be replaced. The 25th Amendment also establishes rules for a president who becomes unable to perform his duties while in office. All right, and this is going back all the way to Woodrow Wilson, who was incapacitated for a period of time. The 25th Amendment protects to ensure that the vice president and others know how to run the country while they're incapacitated. The 26th Amendment lowered the voting age to 18 years old. All right, and anyone who is 18 or over may vote, and this was to ensure that those who were joining the military had the right to vote. You could be 18 to go fight for your country, but you couldn't be old enough to vote, which made no sense. And then finally, the 27th Amendment requires that any law that increased the pay of legislatures may not take effect until after an election. Okay, so essentially that ensures that they have to be reelected and that they couldn't just fill their own pockets while they're in Congress. Because here's the thing, if they're raising their own pay, that's going to look bad to their constituents. And so for them, it kind of gives them a little bit of balance of power there as well. All right, that is the end of section 2. I know we covered a lot there, and that's a lot to remember. Please do your best to try to learn those. you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I'll talk to you soon.